My friends, God is the God of the impossible. It's not just something we say, it's who He is. It's woven into His very nature. From the beginning of time, He has been in the business of making a way where there was no way. And if you find yourself in an impossible situation today, I want you to know that it's not the end of the story. You are standing in the perfect place for a miracle. Think of Abraham and Sarah. God gave them a promise, a destiny, a future that seemed beyond reach. They were old, past the age of bearing children, past the possibility of life coming forth from them. The world would have said, it's over. But God said, it has just begun. And at the appointed time, Sarah gave birth to Isaac. Why? Because what is impossible for man is possible for God. When everything in the natural says it's too late, God says, I am not bound by time. When the world declares something is finished, God speaks a new beginning. Moses and the Israelites stood trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army. There was no way forward, no way back. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and defenseless. But that's exactly where God moves in the moments where human strength fails, where human wisdom falls short. God didn't need a bridge. He didn't need a fleet of ships. He simply made a way through the sea itself. And when the waters parted, the very thing that seemed impossible became the very thing that led them to freedom. Maybe you feel like you're standing before an impossible sea. Maybe you've tried everything, knocked on every door, prayed every prayer, but there's no path forward. But listen, God doesn't need a path. He makes the path. He speaks and the waters move. He commands and the obstacles dissolve. He is not limited by the natural world, by human logic, or by what seems possible. His power has no limits and His ways are higher than ours. When David stood before Goliath, he didn't have the strength, the armor, or the weapons of war. Every expert would have said he didn't stand a chance, but he wasn't relying on human ability. He wasn't trusting in his own strength. He came in the name of the Lord, the God of heaven's armies, the God of the impossible. And with just a sling and a stone, the giant fell. That means it doesn't matter how big the problem is before you. It doesn't matter how outnumbered or unprepared you feel. If God is with you, the impossible will bow before Him. And then there was Elijah standing on Mount Carmel, facing the prophets of Baal. The land was dry, the people had turned away, and the altar of the Lord had been abandoned. But when Elijah called on God, fire came down from heaven, proving to everyone that He alone is God. He didn't need favorable circumstances. He didn't need an advantage. All he needed was faith. And faith will always open the door for God's power to move. The Bible is filled with moments where everything seemed hopeless, where there was no way, where human strength failed, but God never failed. He has never been overwhelmed. He has never been at a loss for what to do. He has never faced an obstacle too great or a situation too complicated. And if He did it then, He will do it now. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But maybe the greatest example of all was when they laid the body of Jesus in the tomb. The stone was rolled over, the guards were posted, and death itself seemed to have won. The disciples scattered, hope seemed lost. But 3 days later, the impossible happened. The stone was rolled away, the grave was empty, and Jesus rose from the dead. What seemed like the greatest defeat became the greatest victory in history. And if God can overcome death itself, what is there in your life that He cannot handle? So don't be discouraged. Don't give up. Don't let the enemy convince you that it's over. The very thing that looks like your greatest obstacle is the place where God is about to move. The very situation that seems too far gone is where He will show His power. Because that is who He is. He is the God of the impossible. And if He is with you, then nothing can stand against you. There comes a moment in every life when fear rises up, when the situation before you seems too overwhelming, too impossible, too beyond your ability to handle. Fear whispers, this is too big. This will never change. You won't make it through this. And in that moment, you have a choice to believe the fear or to believe in the one who is greater than fear. Fear will always try to take hold in the face of impossibility. The enemy wants you paralyzed, trapped in doubt, focused on the problem instead of the God who is bigger than the problem. He wants you to see the storm and forget the one who walks on water. He wants you to see the walls and forget the one who brings them crashing down. He wants you to see the giant and forget the one who has already declared victory. But fear is a liar. It will tell you that your situation is beyond hope, that your prayers don't matter, that God is silent. But faith tells a different story. Faith doesn't deny reality. It doesn't pretend the storm isn't real. But faith chooses to believe that God is greater than the storm. Faith looks at the impossible and says, my God makes all things possible. Faith refuses to let fear take the driver's seat. That's what we see over and over again in the Word. When the 12 spies went to scout the promised land, 10 of them came back full of fear. The land is filled with giants, they said. We are like grasshoppers in their sight. There's no way we can take the land. But two men, Joshua and Caleb, saw the same land, the same giants, the same obstacles, and said, if God is with us, we can surely take it. The giants didn't change. The land didn't change. But what made the difference was faith. 10 men saw through the lens of fear, and 2 men saw through the lens of faith. And only the 2 who walked by faith entered into the promise. Fear keeps you from stepping into the calling, the breakthrough, the promise that God has for you. Fear will always try to keep you on the shore when Jesus is calling you to walk on water. That's what happened with Peter. He saw Jesus walking on the waves and said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you. And Jesus said, come. At that moment, Peter had a choice. He could stay in the boat where it was safe, or he could step out in faith. And he did. He walked on water. But then something happened. The wind blew, the waves crashed, and Peter took his eyes off Jesus. He looked at the storm. And the moment he did, fear took over and he began to sink. The storm didn't suddenly get worse. What changed was Peter's focus. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he did the impossible. But the moment he focused on the problem instead of the one who was above the problem, fear won. And isn't that what happens in our own lives? As long as we keep our eyes on God, we stand firm. But the moment we start looking at the size of the problem, the doctor's report, the financial crisis, the mountain before us, we start to sink. Fear takes over. But do you know what happened when Peter cried out? Jesus immediately reached out his hand and pulled him up. That's who God is. Even when we falter, even when fear grips us, even when we start to sink, he is right there. So what is God calling you to do? What step of faith is he asking you to take? Maybe he's asking you to believe for a miracle when everything in the natural says it's impossible. Maybe he's calling you to step out, to trust him in a way you never have before. And maybe fear is trying to stop you, but fear has no power over the one who walks in faith. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is choosing to trust God even in the presence of fear. It's standing firm when everything in the natural says to give up. It's saying, God, I don't see the way, but I know you are the way. It's refusing to let fear write the ending of your story, because fear will always tell you to stay where it's safe, but faith will lead you to the place of miracles. So do not be afraid. Do not let fear stop you from stepping into what God has for you. The storm may be raging, but your God is greater than the storm. The giant may be standing before you, but your God has already given you the victory. The walls may seem unmovable, but your God has the power to bring them down. So keep your eyes on him, keep your faith in him, and keep walking forward. Because when you choose faith over fear, nothing will be impossible for you. There are moments in life when it feels like nothing is happening. You've prayed, you've believed, you've done everything you know to do, but the situation hasn't changed. The breakthrough hasn't come. The door hasn't opened. The answer seems delayed. And in those moments, it's easy to wonder if God has forgotten, if he's even listening. But God is never late. He is never early. He moves at the exact right moment, and his timing is always perfect. When Lazarus was sick, his sisters Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus. They knew he had the power to heal. They had seen him do miracles before, but Jesus didn't come right away. He waited. And during that time, Lazarus died. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. And Martha said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It seemed too late. The time for a miracle had passed, but Jesus had a greater plan. If he had come earlier, he would have healed a sick man. But because he came in his perfect timing, he raised a dead man. God is not bound by our timelines. He doesn't work according to our schedule. We think he should answer by a certain date, move within a certain time frame prime, but he knows the exact moment that will bring the greatest glory, the greatest transformation, the greatest testimony. And sometimes the delay is not a denial, it's a setup for something even greater than what you asked for. Abraham and Sarah waited years for the promise of God. God had told them they would have a son, that their descendants would be as numerous as the stars. But as time passed, doubt crept in. They tried to take matters into their own hands, thinking maybe they needed to help God fulfill his promise. But God doesn't need our help, he needs our trust. And in his perfect timing, when it seemed humanly impossible, Sarah conceived and Isaac was born. Had it happened earlier, it might have seemed like something they achieved on their own. But by waiting until it was beyond their ability, God made it clear that his miracle, his perfect plan. When the Israelites were trapped at the Red Sea, they must have wondered why God had led them there. Pharaoh's army was closing in and there was no escape. From their perspective, it looked like the worst possible timing. But it was the perfect timing. Had they arrived earlier, there would have been no miracle. Had they arrived later, they might have been overtaken. But at just the right moment, God split the sea and made a way where there was no way. And isn't that what he does in our lives? We want the answer now, but God is working behind the scenes, arranging things in ways we can't even see. Sometimes he delays to strengthen our faith. Sometimes he waits to prepare us for what he's about to do. Sometimes he allows things to seem impossible so that when the breakthrough comes, there's no doubt it was his hand. Think of Joseph. He had a dream that one day he would be in a position of great authority. But instead of seeing that promise fulfilled right away, he was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison. Year after year passed, and it must have seemed like God had forgotten. But God was preparing him. He was molding him, refining him, setting the stage. And at the right moment, in one day, Joseph went from the prison to the palace. Had he been released earlier, he might have settled for something less than the fullness of what God had planned. But because he waited, he stepped into the destiny that had been appointed for him from the beginning. Waiting is never easy. It tests our faith, our patience, our endurance. But God sees the whole picture. He knows what you don't know. He sees what you can't see. And he is never in a hurry, but he is always on time. So if you've been waiting, if you've been praying and haven't seen the answer yet, don't lose heart. The delay is not a sign that God has forgotten you. It's a sign that he is setting something up that is greater than you can imagine. What he has planned is worth the wait. And when his timing is fulfilled, you will see that it was perfect all along. There comes a moment in life when you realize that no amount of striving, no amount of effort, no amount of human strength can change the situation before you. You've tried everything, you've exhausted every option, and yet the mountain remains unmoved. And in that moment, when you reach the end of yourself, you come to a powerful truth. There are some battles that can only be won when you surrender them to God. Surrender is not giving up. It's not resignation. It's not saying this is hopeless. Surrender is an act of faith. It's placing everything, your fears, your burdens, your impossible situation into the hands of the one who has the power to do what you cannot. It's saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my own understanding. I trust you more than what I see, more than what I feel, more than what others say. I trust you even when I don't understand. Hannah understood this. She longed for a child, but year after year, she remained barren. She carried the weight of sorrow, the pain of waiting, the agony of an unanswered prayer. And then one day, she went to the temple and poured out her heart before God. She let go of the burden. She surrendered the outcome. And in that moment of surrender, everything shifted. God opened her womb, and she gave birth to Samuel, one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. What she had tried to hold on to for so long, what she had wept over, struggled over, became a miracle when she placed it in God's hands. How many times do we try to control what was never meant to be in our control? We hold on so tightly to our plans, our desires, our own way of doing things, thinking that if we just try harder, if we just figure out the right solution, we can make it happen. But some doors only open when we stop trying to force them open. Some victories only come when we stop fighting in our own strength and let God fight for us. That's what happened with Jehoshaphat. The armies of Moab, Ammon, Mount Seir came against him, a vast army too great for Israel to defeat. And what did Jehoshaphat do? He didn't call for more soldiers. He didn't devise a military strategy. He called for prayer. He gathered the people and said, "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." And God responded. He told them, "The battle is not yours, but mine." And as the people worshiped, as they lifted their voices in praise, God caused their enemies to turn on each other. By the time Israel arrived, the battle had already been won. They didn't have to lift a single sword. Victory was theirs because they surrendered the fight to God. How many times do we fight battles that were never meant to be ours? How many times do we struggle, we strive, we wear ourselves out when all along God is saying, "Give it to me, let me handle it"? When you surrender, you are not losing, you are stepping into the place where God can move. Look at Jesus. The greatest act of surrender in all of history happened in the Garden of Gethsemane. On the night before he went to the cross, he prayed, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, yours be done." In that moment, he surrendered everything, his suffering, his destiny, his very life into the Father's hands. And because he surrendered, redemption came to the world. Because he let go, the impossible happened. Death was defeated, sin was overcome, and the grave lost its power. So what are you holding on to? What burden have you been carrying that was never meant to be yours? What battle have you been trying to fight in your own strength? Maybe it's time to lay it down. Maybe it's time to say, "God, I give this to you. I can't do this on my own, but I know you can." Because when you let go, when you surrender, that's when miracles happen. That's when God steps in. That's when the impossible becomes possible. So stop striving. Stop trying to do what only God can do. Trust him. Surrender it to him. And watch what he will do. There are moments in life when everything in the natural tells you it's over. The situation is too far gone. The door is shut. The battle is lost. And it's in those moments that the enemy whispers, "Why keep believing? Why keep hoping? Why keep standing? But that is exactly when you must hold on, when you must press forward, because the breakthrough often comes just beyond the moment you feel like giving up. Faith is not about what you see, it's about what you know to be true, even when everything around you says otherwise. It's what kept Noah building an ark when there was no rain. It's what kept Joseph holding on to his dream in a prison cell. It's what kept Paul and Silas praising God in the middle of the night, locked in chains. It's what caused the woman with the issue of blood to push through the crowd, believing that if she could just touch the hem of his garment, she would be healed. And she was. But imagine if she had given up. Imagine if she had said, it's been 12 years, nothing has changed, so what's the point? She would have missed the miracle waiting just beyond the moment of despair. That's the strategy of the enemy, to keep you weary, to make you believe that holding on is pointless, that waiting on God is in vain. But the enemy is a liar. The same God who parted the sea, who brought water from the rock, who raised the dead, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if he did it before, he will do it again. Elijah knew this. There had been no rain in Israel for 3.5 years. The land was dry, the people were desperate, and Elijah went up to Mount Carmel to pray. He bowed down, placed his face between his knees, and cried out to God. And then he told his servant, go and look toward the sea. The servant went and came back saying, there is nothing, nothing. No sign of change. No hint of a breakthrough. How many times have we been there, praying, believing, waiting, and seeing nothing? That's the moment of testing, the moment when many give up. But Elijah didn't. He told his servant to go back. Not once, not twice, but 7 times. And on the 7th time, the servant returned and said, I see a cloud as small as a man's hand rising from the sea. That was all Elijah needed. He knew the breakthrough was coming. The sky that had been empty for years was about to pour down rain. But what if he had stopped at the 6th time? What if he had said, I've prayed enough, I've waited long enough, and nothing is happening? He would have missed the miracle. So many people stop on the 6th time. They pray, they stand, they believe, but when they don't see the answer, they walk away. They don't realize that the breakthrough was just beyond that moment. They were one prayer away, one more act of faith away, one step away from seeing the cloud in the sky, but they stopped too soon. God's promises are not empty. His word does not return void. If he has spoken it, he will bring it to pass. But the timing is his, not ours. And sometimes the greatest test of faith is to keep walking when nothing seems to be happening, to keep believing when there's no evidence, to keep standing firm when everything around you says to give up. Think of the Israelites marching around Jericho. God told them that the walls would fall, but he didn't tell them when. He told them to march, so they did. 1 day, nothing happened. 2 days, nothing happened. 3, 4, 5, 6 days, nothing. The walls were still standing. The city was still fortified. Nothing had changed. But on the 7th day, after the 7th time around, the walls came crashing down. What if they had stopped on day 6? What if they had said, we've done enough, we've seen nothing, let's stop here? They would have walked away from their miracle. If God has placed a promise in your heart, if he has called you to believe for something, then don't stop too soon. Keep praying, keep standing, keep believing your cloud is coming. The walls are about to fall. The breakthrough is on the way. And when it comes, you will see that every moment of waiting, every act of faith, every prayer you prayed was never in vain. There comes a moment when you have done all you can. You have prayed, you have stood in faith, you have waited, and still the situation remains unchanged. The mountain has not moved, the storm has not ceased, and the breakthrough has not yet come. It is in that moment that you must choose not to retreat, not to give up, but to trust. To trust that God is still working, even when you cannot see it. To trust that he is still moving, even when nothing appears to be changing. To trust that he has not abandoned you, that he has not forgotten you, that he is still the God who makes the impossible possible. When the 3 Hebrew men stood before King Nebuchadnezzar, they were given a choice bout to the golden image or be thrown into the fiery furnace. And what did they say? Our God is able to deliver us from the fire, and he will deliver us. But even if he does not, we will not bow. That is trust. That is faith beyond sight. They did not trust in God only if he delivered them. They trusted him regardless of the outcome. And because they refused to bow, because they chose to stand, the fire had no power over them. They were thrown into the furnace, but they were not consumed. The flames surrounded them, but they were not burned. And when the king looked into the fire, he saw not 3 men, but 4. The 4th was like the Son of God. What does that mean? It means that when you trust God in the fire, he is with you in the fire. When you walk through the storm, he is in the storm with you. When you face the impossible, he does not leave you to face it alone. And the same God who walked with them through the fire walks with you now. Job was a man who had everything: wealth, health, family, blessing, and then in a moment it was all taken from him. He lost everything. And yet, even in the midst of his pain, even when he did not understand, he said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." That is trust beyond understanding, trust that does not waver even when everything around you is falling apart, trust that holds on even when there are no answers, even when the pain is great, even when nothing makes sense. And because Job held on, because he refused to turn away, in the end, God restored everything he had lost and more. We see it over and over again in Scripture. God does not always move the way we expect. He does not always answer the way we want, but he is always faithful. He is always working, even in the silence, even in the waiting, even in the moments that seem like nothing is happening. Think of Mary and Martha when their brother Lazarus died. They had sent word to Jesus, believing that he would come in time, but he didn't come. He waited, and Lazarus died. From their perspective, it was too late. The miracle they had hoped for had not come, but Jesus had something greater in mind. He didn't just heal Lazarus, he raised him from the dead. And when he did, they saw a greater revelation of his power than they ever had before. Sometimes what looks like an unanswered prayer is actually God setting the stage for something greater. Sometimes the delay is not a denial, it is preparation for a greater miracle, a greater revelation of his glory, a greater testimony of his faithfulness. Trusting God does not mean that everything will happen the way you want or in the timing you expect. It means that no matter what happens, you believe that he is good, that he is sovereign, that he is working all things together for your good. It means that even when you do not understand, you choose to believe. Even when the road is long, you choose to walk in faith. Even when the answer does not come as you expected, you choose to trust that his ways are higher, his thoughts are greater, and his plan is perfect. So do not be discouraged. Do not let doubt take hold. Do not let fear convince you that God has forgotten you. He has not. He is with you, he is for you, and he is working all things together for your good. Keep trusting, keep believing, keep standing firm, because in the end, you will see that he was always faithful.